We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Tuesday, October 28th here in Seoul. I'm Isujin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Q.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Also, Niles with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's the second day of the work week, Tuesday, and by now many of us are settling into our routines, but routines aren't just about work. They're also shaped by the spaces we live in. Our homes, apartments, or shared living spaces influence how we start our mornings, relax in the evenings, and connect with others. So I wanted to ask you, Kyun, what kind of housing situation are you living in these days? Are you living in an apartment, sharing a house with friends, or is it somewhere completely different?
So I'm currently living in a low-rise apartment called villa in Korean. Mind you, it's very different to the villa we know in English, to Korean, in the Jamsil area where the famous landmark Lotte Tower is located. So I've lived with my brother for a good 5 years and continue to do so until one of us gets eventually married. And I'm living under the 전세 housing system that is quite common in Korea, but it may be a little unfamiliar to our viewers. So those who are not quite sure what 전세 is, it is a unique long-term rental system that lies between buying a house and renting one. So instead of paying monthly rent, the tenant deposits a large sum of money, often 50 to 80% of the property's market value, to the landlord at the start of the 2-year lease contract. The landlord can invest or use the money during the lease, and the entire lease deposit has to be returned to the tenant when the lease ends.
I think that was a great explanation of what that is. So what about you, Niall?
Right, and I mean, I've lived in Jeonse for a little while as well, but I actually looked this up. I used to think that Korea was the only place with this Jeonse system, but in particular, I found that they have this system in Bolivia as well, and in Bolivia, it's called anticretico, and in India, they have a higher deposit and smaller rent fee, which in Korea would translate into maybe 반전세, and I'm currently living in a 반전세, and just like you, and I'm living in a villa, not villa. This means it's
very different.
Yes, very different. It's not as luxurious with fountains in the back as you think, but a low-rise building. I'm living with my husband and son, and hopefully we'll move to an apartment building next.
So I look forward to hearing more about this. But with housing prices continuously reaching new highs, young people are finding it harder than ever to secure a place of their own. So let's take a look at the screen to learn more. Skyrocketing housing prices in South Korea have made it increasingly difficult for millennials and Gen Zs to find a place to call home. Addressing this challenge has been a major focus for the government, with the current administration rolling out a series of housing measures aimed at improving access. So today on News Generation, we'll take a closer look at why securing housing has become so challenging for young people, what the current housing landscape looks like, and share some tips for achieving housing stability specifically for the millennial and Gen Z generation. So as we just saw in the video, housing has become one of the biggest worries for young people today. For many millennials and Gen Zs, buying a home feels almost out of reach no matter how long they save or how hard they work. Kyun, could you explain why owning a home has become so difficult for young people in Korea these days?
Sure thing. So to start off with, the average price of an apartment in Seoul is approximately 910 million won, which is roughly 630,000 US dollars. Now, for an average salaryman, it is far too expensive to fully own a house, usually an apartment in the Seoul metropolitan area, because the average monthly wage for office workers in Seoul is around 4.77 million won, which is not too low. It's quite high, mind you. And hypothetically, if you didn't spend a single won of your monthly wage, it would take, believe this guys, 15 years and 11 months to actually buy an apartment. So it basically means you need to take out a mortgage loan. But even if you do, you will have to continue to earn money just to pay back the loan, plus the interest. So in reality, it's almost impossible for young people to buy a home just by saving up their salaries. So For me, I've been saving up for housing lotteries or 주택 청약 in Korean. But just like the name suggests, you need to be more than lucky to be selected in the first place, especially in this whole area where everyone wants to live. And I don't have a concrete plan for now as owning my own house because it seems like it's only for those privileged people who have parents who own multiple houses and it's going to end up being one of theirs. But for me, it's a different story. So I guess there is a stark contrast. But for, I think, people like us, the government obviously, I know they're trying. They need to roll out more affordable apartments within the Seoul metropolitan area where I guess like more than half the population is living in right now.
Right.
So I think in the long run, I'm sure it's going to get better. But for now, the situation is quite tough.
You said 15 years. That kind of reminds me of the film Parasite.
Oh yes.
Like during the last scenes was about how the family would have to spend decades just to buy their own house.
But this is when you don't spend a single dime of your
Exactly.
4.77 million Korean won.
I mean, that's a lot too, yeah. So many young people feel stuck. Renting isn't cheap either, but buying a house feels completely out of reach. It's no wonder so many young people apply for these housing lotteries without a clear plan. I mean, you are just basically hoping for a miracle. And for our generation, housing isn't just an economic issue. It's tied to when and whether we get married, start families, and just feel settled. So how was the housing situation different for our parents' generation now?
I would say this was kind of maybe because I wasn't a parent in that generation. It seems like the Korean dream, the white picket fence, get married and buy a house and pay it back, live in it together. And while it was a bit of a strain on their part, it wasn't impossible. It wasn't an unreachable goal. But for our current generation, as Kyun mentioned earlier, it's close to impossible. And many give up and even decide to live in a rented home for the rest of their lives. And according to 2023 statistics, the home ownership of young people here in Korea is less than 15%. So this trend is even more pronounced in larger cities like the Greater Seoul area, as we talked about. And perhaps if you move a little bit outside, then the job availability becomes a huge issue. So unless your parents help you out, as Kyun mentioned, or you succeed with your own investments outside of your salary, it is very, very difficult to buy a house.
So all this really shows how buying a home has become something only a few people can realistically achieve, and that creates a growing divide between those who have financial help and those who don't. But the housing crisis isn't actually just a problem here in Korea. So young people around the world are facing similar challenges. So what's the situation like for young people in other countries, Kyun?
So even in the United States, millennials and Gen Zs are facing serious housing crisis as well. So let's take a look at the screen for more details. According to S&P Global, the US housing price index, which was set at 100 in the year 2000, rose to 125 in 2010, 182 in 2020, and is now nearing 331. So this means that housing prices have increased by 230% since the year 2000. Now, recently, a new social trend has emerged in the US, where children who have grown up to be adults are increasingly living with their working parents without having a job themselves, instead taking charge of household chores. And so they've been called this newly coined term hub sons or trad sons or even stay-at-home sons. And it just highlights how many young people are struggling to find a stable job and helping them to actually purchase their own homes. Meanwhile, in the US and Australia, more Gen Zs are turning to van dwelling, where they live in a vehicle, most often a van, big van, to save on housing costs, while also enjoying a sense of freedom, mobility, and a sense of romance being out in nature, apparently.
So I guess that's a silver lining there. Yeah. So all this really shows how global this problem is. Some solutions seem practical, others more extreme, but they're all signs of how desperate the situation has become. So we're seeing all kinds of creative living arrangements emerging around the world. So what about other countries? Are there any other unique or surprising solutions young people are turning to now?
Right, just like the ones that we just mentioned, the stay-at-home sons and daughters, they do have this concept of a full-time full-time child in China as well. Some of them even signed contracts with their parents to receive allowances for doing the housework. And yes, we do need some housework that needs to be done around the house. But this is another interesting phenomenon. Also, young people are voluntarily moving into nursing homes, and you can live with about $200 a month there. And they rent a single room out, just like the elderly residents, and they help out with the small tasks at the facility. They earn little money and maintain a very minimal standard of living, and they spend the rest of their time lying down and resting just like the elderly. There's actually a terminology specifically for these people, and it's called tangping, and it means lying flat. And I guess it's to conserve energy, conserve money, and not to move and spend that much money to just survive.
I mean, that does sound quite actually nice.
There's actually more people. You mentioned the van people earlier. There are people who are living on boats as well. So alternative housing in the United Kingdom, and these young people, they couldn't afford housing prices, and so they live on boats. And this number is estimated to be about 30,000 living in the canals near London. And the monthly rent for the 2 small room boathouse is said to be less than half the rent in central London.
Wow. So speaking of the UK, there was actually an artist in London that converted a standard waste container. It's called skip houses in London. So he transformed this into a fully functional tiny home. And it has also called attention to the city's dramatic housing and affordable problems. So this highlights how rent and home purchases in central London are so high that even modest housing has become so unattainable for so many people. And so all this is surprising and a little heartbreaking because these aren't decisions anyone would make if housing was actually affordable. So we're going to actually talk more about this. We're going to hear directly from a young person from the US about her experience with the housing crisis. So that's coming up right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out Channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Sheila, a young person from the States who's currently living in Seoul. So hi Sheila, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. So can you tell us what your housing situation looks like?
Yeah, so as an international student in South Korea, I currently live in a dorm. Now, while that does make sense for a lot of other international students, finding dorming is actually pretty hard as it fills up quite easily. So international students are left to look for off-campus housing, but it could create a lot of challenges in my experience with language barriers. And a lot of landlords are not used to interacting with foreigners, so they hesitate to rent their space to us, and they often require higher deposits, which often creates challenges. I have been in this situation last semester, so I haven't always lived in a dormitory. And when you do find a cheaper area, in my experience, it does take over an hour from your campus, which is really stressful when balancing classes and work. So for me, it's not just about affordability, it's about convenience, but I am super glad that I live in a dorming now. In the US, when I do visit home, I do stay with my parents. So that's my other housing situation.
Wow, that was quite interesting. I never knew how international students face these kind of challenges living in Korea if they can't find a dorm within their school. Now, what is the housing situation like in the US? What are the most common types of housing that millennials like us and Gen Zs like you live in today?
Yeah, so in the US, like I said earlier, I do live with my parents, but the housing costs have risen a lot, even for my parents, my grandparents, and my friends. In the recent years, especially in big cities like LA, New York City, and Washington, D.C., it's becoming way too expensive for anyone to afford. So millennials and Gen Zs have a harder time to become homeowners. So many are renting out apartments or sharing houses with their roommates. I have heard from my friend who lives in New York City that there are becoming more co-living spaces now and micro apartments at a very high price, which is really interesting. But a lot of young people are having student loan debts, and with the high rising rent prices, it's becoming really hard for many young adults to afford homes. So that's the current situation in the United States right now.
In order to change that current situation, what do you think are some solutions and policies that could effectively address the housing challenges for young people?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of steps to get there, and it all starts with the government. I think they should invest more in home affordability projects and even provide rent assistance. Or in in this economic atmosphere, I think lowering interest rates on housing loans for young people would be a really good option. And policies also to regulate rent prices among home and landowners would really encourage more developers to build a mixed income um, housing situation. It could make a lot of difference. But also on the social aspect, I think that a lot of young people should educate themselves about their financial literacy when it comes to being a homeowner and budgeting, which could be a little hard when you have goals like going to school and getting married, but a little step at a time could mitigate these problems.
Wow, thank you.
So it does sound like there's a
Thank you.
lot of stuff that the government can do, and also we can do as individuals as well. So thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You too.
So we just heard from our guest from the US, and she really highlighted that housing challenges aren't unique to Korea. Young people around the world are facing similar struggles. So we also asked on the Arirang News YouTube channel, how much of your income do you spend on housing, such as rent or mortgage? So let's take a look at the results here. So housing takes up a significant share of young people's income. The largest group, 37%, reported spending between 30% and 50% of their income on housing. About 23% of respondents said they spend more than half of their earnings on rent or mortgage payments. Meanwhile, 20% pay between 10% and 30%, and the remaining 20% spend less than 10% of their income on housing costs. So it's clear that these results show that housing is taking a major financial toll on many young people. For many, a large portion of their income is spent just to have a roof over their heads, and it's concerning that so many young people are spending nearly half or even more of what they earn just to pay for housing. So let's talk about something really more fundamental. So why has housing become so expensive, Kyung?
So real estate today is seen not only as a place to live, but as like a also financial asset. And because so many people buy property for investment rather than residential purposes, home prices have far outpaced income levels for ordinary residents. And almost 50% of the total population of Korea is concentrated in the Seoul metropolitan area. So housing demand is extremely high, driving up the prices even more while there is limited supply. And as a result, young people without homes start from a disadvantage when it comes to building wealth and financial security. And I think the current administration have come up with this policy where they want more people to kind of invest in stocks now, rather than shift away from just investing too much into real estate because of these high investment, the prices have gone extremely high, making it almost impossible for young people to actually afford their own home. So, I mean, it's good news. We've heard good news yesterday, the Kospi reaching the 4,000 point mark range. So it's good to see that there is a bit of a balance happening, but I think in the long run, for more young people to feel encouraged to actually start their own family and have children, they need bigger places to live in. And right now, the place I'm living in is definitely not big enough to start my own family, and I need to look for obviously bigger apartments, but it's too expensive. It's almost impossible to get your own house in Seoul, so you have to look outside Seoul, and then comes the new problem where like, if it's too far from work, the commuting becomes another huge problem. So there are so many challenges that young people have to face. That's why they feel very discouraged to even own a house. So they give up on marriage or even having kids, of course. So I think to look further into the future, the government is doing the right thing, I think, right for now, but big changes need to be made so that young people feel, I guess, a bit more comfortable in actually, starting their own family and reduce the shrinking population into, expanding population
Yes.
for Korea.
I think housing, that's why it's such an important thing to talk about, because it's connected to other social
Right,
problems
yeah.
that Korea is dealing with as well. So it's not just about having a place to live. Homes have become major investment assets, so that drives price up beyond what young people are earning. So people that are earning regular incomes can afford. It also means that those without property start adulthood at a disadvantage in also building wealth. So what advice is out there for young people trying to navigate these tough housing conditions now.
I do agree with Ki-hoon that the policies do need to evolve in big ways, but I guess it's to take advantage of the ones that are already there. And in Korea, there are programs such as the Youth Purchase and Rental Housing, which in Korean is 청년 매입 임대, and then newlywed stepping stone loans, 신혼부부 디딤돌 대출, and in Korean called 행복주택, I guess translated loosely is happy housing, where there's different forms like we mentioned, the 전세, or you can purchase a home, and going through these organizations, it will help you get there. And for me personally, I actually started out very small, and I agree with Sheila in the point that she made, taking smaller steps to get to the bigger things. You do have to make a little bit of sacrifices, maybe starting out in a smaller, older apartment building, which is what I did, saving up the money, moving into a 전세 system, and even if it means moving into a basement, which is also what I did, saving that money up until you can afford to maybe add a loan and purchase a house. But I think it's all about those smaller steps working together with government policies.
So whether it's in Korea, the US, or across the world, it's clear that housing has become one of the biggest hurdles for millennials and Gen Zs, from skyrocketing prices to unconventional living arrangements. Young people are having to rethink what home really means. So while the solutions aren't simple, awareness is the first step, and staying informed, exploring creative options, and pushing for policies that support housing stability can make a real difference. But for now, it's a reminder that home isn't just a place, it's a foundation for the future, and finding ways to secure it is one of the finding secure housing is one of today's most pressing challenges for the young generations. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Kyun.
Always a pleasure.
To Ham and Niall.
No problem.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you have the best day. We are
News Generation.